A few years removed from the October 7th tragedy down in the Gaza Strip. Fast forward to today, and Gaza is a completely different world, many would say, and I would argue, for not necessarily the best. So what happens next? Is it something that Israel will take care of? Is it something the United States will take care of, or something else? Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world. If you're looking to lower your blood pressure, lower your resting heart rate while improving your pump at the gym and just your energy across the board, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode, or just go ahead and scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to briannicholsshow.com/Cardio Miracle? Yeah, there we go. Or Cardio Miracle /TBNS. Either one will bring you to the same spot. You'll just see a little notification at the top of your screen saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. But we'll talk about that later in today's episode. But with that being said, let's move on to today's topic of conversation. And by the way, this has been a reoccurring conversation we've seen here, not necessarily all the time on the Brian Nichols Show, but just I think in international politics. And it's become more of a sensational topic here in the United States, and that is what's happening over in the Gaza Strip. Right now, we're seeing this conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians seemingly have no end in sight without some type of, just complete and utter destruction, it feels. And the United States has been playing this role of kind of saying, hey, we're enabling Israel, we're sending our money to Israel, but at the same point in time, not exactly endorsing or supporting what Israel is doing. It seems like there's this strategic ambiguity. Is that on purpose? Is that actually intentional? Let's discuss that and more. Joining me here on the show today to dig into the dirty details is Matej Haiba. Matej, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm doing great, and I really think that lowering your blood pressure in this day and age is a very important topic, because just by getting up in the morning, you open the news and it just immediately does more harm to your blood pressure than the several cups of coffee that's needed to wake up.
Ain't that the truth? I've been using Cardio Miracle now, man, for like 2-3 years. And I'll tell you what, like I saw my blood pressure, like it was high there for a while. I started taking Cardio Miracle and it just absolutely dropped. And then, granted, this is anecdotal, but I know I'm not the only one who's experienced the benefits of Cardio Miracle. But you're right. You open the news headlines and everybody's blood pressure, whether it's domestic politics, foreign politics, or a combination therein. So yeah, that's a great endorsement to Cardio Miracle. But Matej, I appreciate you joining the show today. You're joining us from Hungary, the country Hungary, not what I usually am in the morning. So talk to us. What's going on over in Hungary, and why are you so focused on this world of foreign policy, specifically how America is getting involved there over in the Middle East, Gaza Strip area?
Thank you very much. So Hungarians shouldn't really be interested in U.S. politics, but it's a fact that with Trump, everything, all the news is overflooded with news of the president. So very much of the world is looking at what's going on there. Also interested in foreign policy as such, and I'm a Young Voices contributor, so I write a lot on foreign policy. I also run a Hungarian think tank called Free Market Foundation, and we are looking at best practices and good examples on policy. So I'm following what's happening in other countries. And seemingly, as you talked about the news, if you just open up any news page, you are seeing that the world is on fire. I don't think it's any worse than it's have ever been, or it's actually better now than, say, 200 years ago. Then you didn't have Facebook or other social medias to give you a lot of anxiety, but that's the bane of modern technology, despite a lot of upsides. However, I think that people should care. It's not just an American topic, what's going on, because the world has always looked at the US to step up and lead through example, not necessarily to solve the world's issues hands-on, but to be there to guide the world. It's the whole US as a country, as an idea, it's been a totally new thing in our world with the democratic experience, with democracy, and there's been a huge economic boom in the US, so the US should know how things are done in the good way. Whereas Europe is now the old continent, and I'm pretty much afraid it's getting to the retirement age rather than the wise old age. So I think the US has a lot of role in how the world is doing business, because it's all about business. Trump is a businessman, and he's running negotiations not really as a diplomat should, but as a strong-handed businessman, a big stack bully who has all the chips, which is not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's too early to know what's happening. So with the whole Trump phenomenon of power politics, it's too early to decide. We don't know his goals because he's been expertly covering up his real end game on what he wants to do. And for example, with the Gaza situation, he's saying a lot of things. He's saying a lot of things with regards to the Ukrainian situation. He's saying a lot of things with regards to Greenland. Sometimes he's dropping the issues for a couple of days, weeks, but then he's reigniting these topics again. We don't really know if he really wants to do anything with these topics, or these are red herrings or just a vanity project for him. But it really defines world politics at the moment. So what Trump, I think, is saying a lot of things. Some of them will stick, some of them won't. It raises an issue, and people get to talk about the issue. And that's usually enough to get the conversation going on. There are problems, whether Trump is offering a solution or not, or whether he's offering a bad solution. It's really hard to decide whether he means it, or is it just to raise awareness of the topics, because all the media will start going on rampantly against Trump or for Trump. But I think it's a very interesting communication, what he does, that he's raising a lot of issues and see where it's going.
Well, and let's take a step back here, because I agree. Like I want to focus on, obviously, your article we're discussing today, which digs into a lot of Trump's strategic ambiguity as it pertains to the Gaza Strip and what we're seeing over there. But I just want to go back to something you raised up earlier, and it's this idea that when we look at global politics, it feels that things are always at an 11, right? The world is on fire constantly. At least that's the vibe that we get. But to your point, things are relatively, I'm using the word calm very, very loosely, right? But things are relatively calm when you compare it to historical examples. And we don't need to look too far in our past to see we had 2 world wars in the last century. And that, I mean, literally the world was on fire. Then we had the first use of nuclear weapons on populations. And that right there, I think, gets forgotten because we do, as a society, as just a world in general, we're very much focused on the now. And who can blame us, right? Like when you're dealing with what you're actually experiencing, both in terms of your day-to-day life, but now, to your point earlier, we're all interconnected, right? We all have this little thing in our pocket called a smartphone that gets us connected to anyone, anywhere, at any time. So all of a sudden, the little, and I'm using the word little again very loosely, but the little geographic conflicts that we see happen throughout the world, they used to be little conflicts, and they would likely be resolved in a few weeks, a few months, maybe a few years. But if you were on the other side of the planet, it didn't really concern you. And now, with all of us having these smartphones in our pockets where we can see real time what's happening, instead of it being somewhere thousands and thousands of miles away, it feels like it's happening in our backyard. And you couple that with what I call the weaponized empathy. You end up seeing how lots of folks feel that they need to have a position on a topic. They need to be the moral superior when it comes to engaging in these conversations. And they will leverage the horrific videos that we will see come from these respective areas as kind of the foundation of saying why we need to be concerned. Fast forward to what we're seeing happen in the Gaza Strip right now. And this is a topic of conversation. I know my marketing girl, she told me flat out, we have podcasting organizations we work with, the number one thing they're asking when it comes to getting people booked on shows is what the host's opinion of the Israeli-Gaza conflict is. I've found myself much more being in bed with not so much one side versus the other, almost in the spirit of your article, the strategic ambiguity, because I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I also know what I can control. Here, I got a cough. All right, folks, elephant in the room. The world's a mess. Inflation is crushing savings. Politicians keep spending. So what's your backup plan? Oh, you don't have one. Well, if you don't worry. That's why the Expat Money Online Summit exists. From October 10th through the 12th, my good buddy Mikkel Thorup's bringing in global experts to show you how to protect your wealth, secure a second residency, lower your taxes, and even own property abroad. And by the way, it's totally free. So no flights, no hotels, just grab your ticket and tune in. And this year, the focus is on Latin America, with booming opportunities in countries like Argentina, El Salvador, Panama, and Paraguay. These doors are open right now, but only if you take action. And how do you do that? Well, head to expatmoneysummit.com and reserve your free, yes, I said free ticket. And by the way, if you want a full VIP package, you can use promo code TBNS for 20% off. That's expatmoneysummit.com, promo code TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. Sorry about that. So when I know, and this is something I used to teach my sales team when I would coach my SDRs and BDRs, is control what you can control, right? There are things we can absolutely have influence on. Let's focus on those things versus the things that are, completely out of our wheelhouse, or things that we might care about, but we really don't have any levers we can pull to change the outcome. Now, this might be a little different as it pertains to what's happening over in Israel and in the Gaza Strip, because we are sending billions of dollars over to Israel. Our tax dollars as Americans are funding a lot of what's happening over there. So I guess the question then comes down to, what should we look to, Matej, in terms of international conflicts or international, humanitarian crises, whatever that may be, and say, yes, we should be concerned and we can help address the problem, versus this is completely out of our purview. It's not something that we could actually have some type of control over. And we just kind of got to focus on what we can actually control here domestically versus trying to be this quote unquote world's policeman. I set you up there a lot for you to dig into. So where do you want to start?
It's a tough question because as a Hungarian, I'm in a position to say what Americans should do. I would rather have things well done in my own backyard than in Hungary. However, I think what you were talking about is that there are really no black and white point of views. There rarely is there in a conflict. So with the crisis in Gaza, I think there are a lot of protests for Palestine. There's a lot of hardliners on Israel, and I don't think it's just this two-sided, because obviously a terror organization has attacked Israel, and Israel has a right to defend itself. However, there's a lot of humanitarian crisis that Israel's been doing a lot of. Not Israel, Netanyahu specifically has been not really probably strategic on his answer to all the problems, and that causes a lot of domestic problems for him as well. Maybe it was just a red herring to take the attention away from the other problems. What America should do is, I'm not really a huge fan of foreign aid in any way, or American taxpayers, on any taxpayers' money going into anything really. I much prefer private solutions, given, of course, that this is not a topic where private solutions could be done, because it boils down to politics and diplomacy. And it's a tough thing to say that America should push its own values on other people, because it's not really working. It's the Iraqi war has shown that, or other wars have shown that it's not really working, that people won't forcefully accept American values one day to the next. However, I think that America has chosen Israel as an ally, which was a strategically good decision. And I know a lot of American dollars are going into Israel. However, Israel is a democratic country, still a democratic country, despite of what the opponents of Netanyahu might say. and it's been a bastion of democracy and human rights in an area where terrorist organizations sometimes take over whole countries. So that's a problem, and America should look at strategic ways to support democratic aspirations in neighboring countries, and not support Hamas or Hezbollah, which in a lot of cases foreign aid has been embezzled by terrorist groups and funded weapons against Israel. And that's, of course, that's just a huge boondoggle and a waste of American money. However, I think the crisis won't stop anytime soon, despite of what Trump says. If you see the betting market, for example, porn market, there's been a huge spike in the bets that, the crisis in Gaza will end soon, but now it's just plummeted. It's just 5% at the moment.
Wow. And
I don't think the crisis will end soon. So the US should look at the long-term position rather than a short-term, which unfortunately is inherent in a democracy. Trump won't be able to seek re-election. He has to solve the problems he promised to solve in his 4 years of time. So he'll have to think short-term, unfortunately. And that's a problem. I think the long-term solutions are much better, value-based positions, support for Israel, but support for a peaceful solution to a problem. And Palestinians won't be forcefully evicted from Palestine. I don't think there's a lot of reality. There's been a lot of push against Trump's plan, but I also don't think that the recognition of Palestine as such was a good idea by a lot of European and worldwide nations.
So let's look at where we are today, because I think a lot of people, specifically in America, they see the videos, Matej, coming out of Gaza, and it breaks their hearts. You see literally cities just wiped out. You see the carnage. You see the families who are dealing with the aftermath and how just absolutely tragic it is. And it pulls at the heartstrings of your average everyday person. And I'm wondering how long we can continue this up. And I'm saying we, as to your point, we're kind of supporting this with our tax dollars, right? I'm going to say kind of, we are. So how long do we think that there will be not just the international support of Israel, but also this American support of Israel, that we can keep on keeping on before enough people raise up and say, I'm done. I'm not voting for any candidates who are running for office that support this? Like, is there a red line that you see that could impact the overarching, like, not just the perception of what's happening over in Gaza, but just the overarching perception of what America's role from a foreign policy perspective would look like?
Well, I think drawing a red line is very difficult, because obviously Israel will always be a tricky situation. People would generally want to support Israel. There's a historic reasons of the Holocaust and everything that will induce people to help Israel in the long term. However, we don't know what's going to happen. So I think the red line should be decided. It will be decided, I think, through uproar in society. It's not going to be a red line drawn by Congress or by Trump. If Israel oversteps its boundaries, as it has several times, there might be one atrocity that will be one too many, and people will really be upset, and that will push policymakers to reconsider their strategy. However, I would draw a line at supporting Israel versus supporting Netanyahu's policies, because I think now Netanyahu is pushing policies that are not good. Obviously, they are innocent people. Palestinians who were not part of the attack against Israel are suffering and dying, and Netanyahu is actively pursuing a strategy which hurts innocent people, and that's not good. And I don't think Netanyahu deserves support for it. However, I don't know what alternative there is. I'm not really that.
And Matej, really quick, why do you think he is doing that? Like, he knows that the spotlight is on him in Israel right now. So you would think this would be the time where he would be, at the very minimum, trying to create a perception of, hey, we're the good guys here, we're doing the right thing. And yet what we hear is this narrative of, well, you look at the military occupation we're doing in Gaza, and we have a greater 1-to-1 ratio of bombs dropped with civilians killed. So if we wanted to do horrible atrocities, we could do it. Like, that narrative doesn't sell. And I think lots of people are waking up to that. So why do you think that he's going out of his way to do things that objectively are changing the public perception for the worst of Israel while this big spotlight is on them?
You've spent your whole life building something meaningful, a career, a family, a legacy. But none of that matters if your health can't keep up. And the truth is, as we age, our body's natural production of nitric oxide, which is vital for circulation and heart function, declines sharply. And that drop increases your risk for high blood pressure, poor oxygen flow, and even cognitive decline. You don't feel like yourself, and no doctor seems to have an answer that doesn't involve more prescription medication. And that's why I recommend Cardio Miracle, because it's an all-in-one blend of nitric oxide boosters like L-arginine, L-citrulline, organic beets, and more that support your cardiovascular system, brain function, and your immune response. It's not about reversing time. It's about giving your body what it needs to keep showing up strong. You've worked too hard to feel like you're fading. So scan that little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS and get back in control of your health. And look for the little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols on the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
I think there's another side of the coin. I'm not trying to relativize the situation, but there's been a lot of battle for hearts and minds from both sides. And usually Hamas specifically, with backing from Iran, had an excellent propaganda job, unfortunately. And even before Israel started to amp up its attack on civilians, and we have seen it in previous crises as well, that people usually tended to side with the Palestinians and Hamas because they were depicted as the underdogs. And Israel has tried in a lot of cases to warn the civilians in Gaza, for example, and in Palestine, to evacuate a certain building before it was bombed. So they were really trying to avoid civilian death in the beginning of the crisis. And in previous crises, it didn't really help with the whole image of Israel, because there were always dead children being shown, and it's obviously a horrible image, and it's very hard to fight against. And there will be, unfortunately, despite the best of intentions, if there are of any attacker, there will be civilian casualties. However, I think that was in the past, and now Israel is overstepping serious red lines, that it's not doing enough to protect civilians. But what Netanyahu is, I think, doing is that he really wants to look at like a hardliner on these topics. There's a lot of radicals in his government that are, it's a very fragile coalition that he has. He's pretty much on the razor's edge. So he, I think, took a risk at being a hardliner and punishing Palestine for the attack rather than having a strategy game and seeing the hostages being freed, having diplomatic efforts or talks in the background, and having surgical strikes against those that needs to be punished, because obviously people needs to be punished for what they've done to Israel, and Israel has not just a moral duty, but they need to keep face and show that they are still a country that terrorists shouldn't be messing with. However, I don't think that civilians should suffer because of it. So in the long term, I don't think Netanyahu will come off well from this crisis, but I don't know how many innocent people will have to die before he's out.
So, and let's go back, because it's easier to go back and have the magic wand where we can control all the variables, right? What would have been the play to help make this less of a less of a regional crisis that has vastly gone beyond the region, and now it's global crisis, it seems, with the attention. What could have Israel done differently if Matej, you were in charge or you were advising Benjamin Netanyahu? And I guess what could America have done, if anything? What was there a role for us to have influence here? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's an overly complex issue because it's a complex system. We are in a globalized world, so it's basically the chaos theory that a butterfly flaps its wing and there is a hurricane at the other end of the world. I think we are so interconnected that it's such a complex system that I don't really know where all the pieces are falling in place. I think one player we are not really talking about in this situation is Iran, who is backing Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and other terror groups. Now, Iran has been considerably weakened in this situation, so Israel could really focus on Hamas and Gaza, and I think they're just trying to push the envelope and see how far they can go in leveling Gaza, basically. I think Israel and the US made a good strategic decision in targeting Iran and trying to weaken the Iranian system. I think there was a hope that the regime in Iran will fall. We have not seen this so far, but we don't know what's going to happen if it will fall. It's not the question of people are not wanting a regime change, but who will spearhead this change in Iran, because obviously it needs to be an Iranian leader who takes over and democratizes Iran. I think that was a huge piece in the puzzle. So I think strategically, weakening Iran was a good decision, but then I don't think that the all-out war in Gaza was a good decision. I think Israel has the capacity. I don't know, because I don't think a lot of people know how much capacity it has to actually target the perpetrators of the attacks and Hamas, which it has done with the pager attack and all these strategic attacks. I don't think an all-out war is usually an answer in this situation. So I think there should have been a lot of Secret Service operations and special forces operations rather than an all-out conflict.
Yeah, man, shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? And this is something just with the way the world is today, Matej, right? Like, because we are so interconnected, we know that whenever these kind of conflicts start to take place, there will be an international spotlight. So I see the other side of the aisle too. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? And I was just listening to a debate over on Tim Pool's Culture War podcast, and it was a pro-Palestinian commentator versus a pro-Israeli commentator. And I really like that in your article, and as we talked today, you've taken much more of an objective perspective versus being a hardliner one way or another. Because when you see the hardliner approach, and this is something I saw in this podcast debate, where the pro-Israel guy, he's, if you're Muslim and you're in the Gaza Strip and you're even tacitly supporting Hamas, you're the enemy, right? Like, doesn't matter if you're a civilian or not. You're on the list, right? You're a target. On the other side, the guy that was pro Palestine, he's out there arguing that Hamas is not a terrorist organization and that October 7th wasn't a terrorist attack, and that was freedom fighters trying to fight back against an occupying force. And I'm sitting there listening, and I'm saying, guys, it's the Family Guy meme, kids, you're both terrible. Like, that's what I felt like, because it is very easy, especially with audience capture, to plant your flag on the most sensational side of an issue. But as most issues that are complex are, there are shades of gray. And I just think, as you go through your article, and this correlates to what we're seeing objectively happening in real life, the answer is not one definitive yes versus one definitive no. There's something in the middle that we have to come to an agreement with. It's this yin and yang that we have to be able to try to get towards, I think, because when you just go with the sensationalized, one side versus the other side, that means that someone has to win, and inevitably someone will have to lose. And I know that there is a desire from a lot of folks on each side of the aisle to see the other side lose. But my concern, and I think this is a concern that lots of folks across the world believe and feel, is that if one side were to objectively win versus the other, that it's going to just manifest itself 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever years down the road in some other new conflict. So what's the way out here, Matej? Like, where do you see us heading with the Gaza conflict? Again, the Americans' role here with Donald Trump trying to play somewhat of a peacekeeper, unless we do end up turning the Gaza Strip into like Trumptopia. Like, I don't know what's going to happen there, but that's been the vibe he's been presenting. So what are your thoughts in terms of actually addressing this issue without it being, one side being the overwhelming victor, one side being the overwhelming loser? Is there a shade of gray? Is there a middle ground? And what would that look like?
Well, I think that you mentioned that there should be winners and losers, and that's being a zero-sum game. I think, obviously, and that's an ideology. It's an ideal solution, which is overly ideal and not necessarily pragmatic, but people should aspire for a win-win situation, which I think there's so much spite now in the Middle East that it's not going to be happening anytime soon. However, that being said, I think that what you mentioned about a staunchly pro-Israel or a staunchly pro-Palestine stance is that in Israel, Muslims can live peacefully and coexist with the Jewish population, or that has been the case for a while. I don't think it's gonna keep up because there's so much ire between the two populations, and it's that you're trying to find enemies, and an enemy without that. If a Muslim guy is not condemning Hamas, then it must be an enemy, and enemies obviously have to be eliminated. And all Israelis are bad. I think that just so this radicalizes people, and it's a very powerful political tool to design an enemy, an outward force that will come and get you and try to eliminate you, and it creates huge splits and gaps in society. And I think politicians are aiming to do that. It's been the idea of a German ideologue by the name of Carl Schmitt, who was a part of the Nazi Party, unfortunately. So it's been a tried and tested method of trying to say that everyone without is an enemy, and they are trying to get you and radicalize your own population. It will escalate things.
Does it feel like your office has quietly turned into a mini call center? I mean, you didn't plan for it, but between the customer service calls, the sales follow-ups, and team check-ins, the phones are ringing nonstop, and you're stuck managing it all with a setup built for 2012. And that's what I call the accidental contact center. And it's more common than you think. Level 365 makes it easy for you to level up. You'll get call routing, full call history, real analytics without buying some massive contact center platform. It's plug-and-play simplicity for businesses that suddenly found themselves taking way more calls than expected. If that sounds like you should check out Level 365.
And that's not going to be a good situation, obviously. However, what Trump, I think, is doing is, I don't think he needed to raise awareness of the situation in Gaza, because people were already aware of what was going on. By saying that he wants to do a big property development there, that's his go-to thing as a developer, I don't think it created a lot of pushback against him. We don't really know what his aim was with the situation.
Does he?
Don't think he meant it. I think with all these things, he just raised his own brand. He raised awareness to him to distract from what's actually happening in Gaza, and he wanted to capitalize his own on the news, because Gaza was making a lot of news. He wanted to jump on the bandwagon and grab some of the attention. I don't think he had any more aim with that. And with the AI video that came out a couple of months ago, the infamous Trump Gaza video, I think it was a very shrewd way of, he didn't do it, he probably didn't commission it, but it was an interesting way that people started to talk about Trump in Gaza, and it was generated by AI, and a couple of months weeks after he came up with the AI strategy. So it was, I think, a good branding move to try to shift the conversation from Gaza to AI. And it's distasteful in some way, in a lot of way, but it's his way of communication, and he's trying to grab attention in every single opportunity.
Donald Trump, he is absolutely the master marketer, right? Branding, marketing, that is his jam. It's funny. I'm a Cowboys fan, and anybody who knows anything about the NFL, they know that Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, that is literally what he cares about. He does not care about wins or losses. He does not care about Super Bowls. He cares about the Dallas Cowboys being America's team. He cares about the Dallas Cowboys being valued at the highest rate of any professional sports team in the country. He cares about the Dallas Cowboys being on primetime television as many times as he can during the season. He cares about the Dallas Cowboys being the top of the headlines, even when it's not an NFL season. And I look at somebody like a Jerry Jones in the NFL, and then I looked at Donald Trump, and I'm like, it's the same thing. It's the same approach. Like, it's always branding. It's always marketing. And the actual policy that Trump positions, it's not so much if it works or not. It's a matter of how he can present it and try to capture that mind share and that bandwidth to keep himself and the branding top of mind, but also to create perception. And the reality is that perception becomes reality. So I think we're right now, we're looking at what's happening in the Gaza Strip. We're looking at what's happening, Matej, internationally. And to your point, right, like everybody wakes up every morning and they open the news and they say, good morning. And then they find out why it's not, right? Because of all the horrible things that are seemingly happening across the planet, that is. So I guess my final thoughts for today, going back to the point I raised earlier, is, folks, stop being overwhelmed with things we personally cannot control. If we have something that's just, it's irking us, it's bothering us, and the only way to solve it is to have some policymaker go and pass some legislation or to make some stump speech, like, don't do that. Like, you're just going to be exhausted. You're going to be tired, because these are things that we personally can't control. What we can control, though, is our own communities, our families, right? We can actually go out, have an impact there. So let's double down on that. That's my final thoughts, at least. And I know, Matej, you're actually out there right now doing more or less that exact prescription for Hungary. You're helping build up a libertarian ethos over there. Tell us about that as we wrap things up today.
Yeah, thank you. So just circling back on what you said and brand building, I think the brand needs to have a lot of trust, and that's not really what Trump is doing in a lot of cases, that there's not a lot of trust behind what he says. And when you read the news, obviously bad news sells better, and news media is a business, so they need to sell the news. But if you are overselling bad news, then you're losing trust. And I think trust is one of the key things in diplomacy, in soft power, which Trump is not really strong on. So I think that it all boils down to building trust. And I think what you mentioned, trust should be built in from the bottom up in your own communities, because I don't know about you, but in Hungary and in a lot of places in the world, people don't really know their neighbors anymore. If they live in cities, in big apartment buildings, they don't really communicate, and you don't trust someone who you don't really know. And I think that's one of my pet peeves in Hungary. I'm running a foundation called a Free Market Foundation, and we are trying these core buttons, grassroots things. We have three main projects. One is regulations. We are trying to push for deregulation and private solutions over public ones. The other main thing that we are doing is mental well-being. So we are trying to solve the mental health crisis, which costs a lot of money for taxpayers. And I think trust is one of the key factors. People don't really talk anymore. They don't talk about their own issues. They dare not talk about their own anxieties. There's a lot of problems, and you don't have to think big mental health problems, but small anxieties. By just living in a city, you are more likely to develop anxieties and depression than by living in rural areas, but more and more people are living in cities. And by having a strong community, I think it's much better for your mental well-being and physical well-being as well. Talking out things, trusting each other, trying to solve problems rather than looking for your local politician or federal politicians to solve the problems. It's not the government's job, or shouldn't be, I think, to solve these problems, but it should be the community, and it would help the loneliness crisis, which is also growing. And we're trying to use art as a medium to communicate liberty. We are publishing children's books. We are collecting poems from libertarian and classical liberal poets who are writing about issues, because it's really difficult to talk about why high taxes are not good. It's a very complex issue that people don't really care. But if you are,
I was going to say, not sexy either.
No, not at all. But if you are using art as a medium, you are trying to speak to people, not using graphs and numbers or studies, and people not going to read it. I think it's a much better tool to show why liberty is much better than the alternative.
Here. Matej, this has been a great conversation. I want folks to be able to go ahead, reach out to you if they want to continue the conversation themselves. So where's the best place to go ahead, find you, social media links, all that and more?
My works and my articles can be found on the Young Voices website. I'm old-fashioned enough to not really do social media at the moment. It's probably a mental health thing as well, that it's not really conducive to a calm existence. But if you are looking for Free Market Foundation, you can Google it, because the website is in Hungarian, and it's much easier to just Google Free Market Foundation Hungary.
There you go. All right, Matej Hyba, this has been a great conversation. Again, folks, if you got some value from today's chat, please do me a favor. Go ahead, give today's episode a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on X, Facebook, and Instagram. As for the Brian Nichols Show, we air the show both in a video format as well as an audio format. So for the video format, the aforementioned X and Facebook, and also over on YouTube and Rumble, the episode will go live at 9 p.m. Eastern on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And the audio version you can find over on your favorite podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, and more. Also airing shortly thereafter, Monday, Thursdays, and Fridays. And a reminder, the Brian Nichols Show is part of the Lions of Liberty Network. My show will air every Thursday over on Lions, but you can catch all of our other hosts, amongst them Brian McWilliams, John Odermatt, and the great Lou Perez, and yours truly. We make up the Lions of Liberty. And we also do a standalone show called Politics, talking about the bloodsuckers in Washington, because they are all bloodsuckers, and that is the truth. Go ahead and check those out as well. Otherwise, I think this has been a great chat. And folks, again, please do me a favor. Go ahead, give today's episode a share. But with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Matej Hyba. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.